All right. Thanks for joining everybody today for the Elixir meetup, San Francisco Elixir, I guess. This is our second one back after, having a hiatus during this pandemic. So trying to do more in person, but hopefully that'll, be soon over the next month or two. Definitely kind of reaching out to companies, but they're still kind of holding back at this point, at least in San Francisco. So hopefully that'll happen soon. Yeah, but today we have a great talk by Jared Santo, one of the co-hosts of the Changelog podcast, and he's going to be giving us a talk about Elixir in Phoenix and how it's been powering Changelog's open source news and podcasting platform. Go ahead and take it away, Jared.
Well, thanks for having me. Let me go ahead and set up here. So the idea here is I do have a slide deck, going to go through some of the history, get to know where we've been, kind of where we got to here. And then I'll also try to keep it interactive as well. I don't like monologues too much. As a podcaster, we like to discuss. We don't like to just talk. So feel free to pipe in as I go. No need to wait till the end if you have something to say. But at the end, I will also walk through some codes, maybe just some more interesting or what I think are cool parts of the code base. And at that time, we can really open up and ask questions and discuss. So that's kind of my general plan. Let me go ahead and share screen. All right, cool. So once again, I'm Jared Santo. You may or may not have heard of the Changelog podcast, but by the time we're done with here, you'll know more about it than you probably ever wanted to. So we'll go back to the very beginning. We've been around for a very long time. Actually, I shouldn't say we because I wasn't here. So in 2009, which is I guess a year after the iPhone was first launched, GitHub started 08. So it's like the dawn of the GitHub era. Adam Stacoviak and Win Netherland were enthusiasts. Adam was a podcast enthusiast and Win was an open source enthusiast. And they were friends. And they started a podcast. And the idea was just to cover recent changes in popular software packages on GitHub. Adam was very excited about GitHub. And Win was the creator and maintainer of the Twitter Ruby gem. He goes by Penguin on the internets. So if you go back in the Ruby world and you ever use the Twitter gem, that's Win's work. So they got together, decided to create a podcast, hence the name, the Changelog. It started off, it was just a podcast. There was no blog. There was no news feed. It was hosted on Tumblr. And it looked like this, roughly. Minus some album art that's missing there. I actually don't even think this is Tumblr. I'm not sure what this page is, but this is back in January of 2010. So right at the dawn of things. Changelog Show was the domain. Our domain has changed. And you can see there it says the changelog.com. That's the next domain. Here's what the album art looked like, and here's what the podcast sounded like back then.
This is Changelog Spotlight for Wednesday, November 18th, 2009. I'm Adam Stacoviak.
And I'm Win Netherland. We've got a great show for you today.
So that was the opener of the very first episode of what they called Changelog Spotlight. They still hadn't figured out the name exactly yet. And that very first song, that song is called California, and it's by a band local to Adam in Houston that he knows, and got permission for them to put their band's song on his podcast. So very cool, very grassroots. Fast forward now, so that's 09. Fast forward 6 years to 2015. Okay, quite a bit has changed since then. The changelog is now Adam and Jared. That's me. So Win had moved on. He got a job at GitHub and was too busy to continue the pod. The podcast was just a hobby, just a passion project, just a fun thing for many years. And it slowly turned into a business that supports both Adam and my family, which is pretty cool, as well as some contractors. So it is a business today, but it wasn't back then. We had joined the 5x5 podcast network, which is run by Dan Benjamin, and featured a whole bunch of techie, nerdy, developer-y podcasts, Apple fans, etc. So we joined that. At that point, it was self-hosted on WordPress. So it went from Tumblr to WordPress. It went from changelogshow.com to thechangelog.com. And there's a whole story there. In fact, Quincy Larson from Free Code Camp did like this ridiculously long 4-hour interview with Adam and I, the deep dive back a couple of years ago, 2019. So if you're interested in the full story, it's not all that interesting, but some people find it interesting. You can go watch that or listen to that on the Free Code Camp podcast. So that's how I came to be part of it and all that kind of jazz. We'll just skip all that. Here's what the website looked like at that time, which this is March of 2015. And you can see episode number 147, Elixir and Phoenix with Chris McCord. This was our WordPress setup. Here's what the album art looked like at that time. And here's what the podcast sounded like.
Welcome back, everyone. This is the Changelog, and I'm your host, Adam Stakoviak. This is episode 147, and today Jared and I are talking to Chris McCord, talking about Elixir on top of Erlang, Phoenix, the web framework. Definitely got me and Jared thinking about concurrency and Elixir for an upcoming project. Phoenix sounds really cool. You're going to love this conversation with Chris.
See? The plot thickens. So you can hear Adam talking about our conversation with Chris McCord about Elixir and Phoenix. So that was 2015. Okay, fast forward to today. All right. We're still hosting it. We just shipped our 500th episode of the podcast. That show, The Changelog, is part of what we call the Changelog podcast universe. We have other shows now. And now it's a custom Phoenix app that's hosted on fly.io with Fastly in front of it. Here's what the website looks like today. Here's that episode 500, The Legacy of CSS Tricks with Chris Coyer. Here's what the album art is today. And here's what it sounds like today.
Well, we're here. We made it. This is episode 500, and it has been a journey, a long journey. Nearly 13 years ago, we started this podcast, and as of today, as of this very episode, we have officially shipped our 500th episode. And as a companion to this episode, Jared and I also shipped a special episode of Backstage, where he and I reflect on these 500 episodes. A link is in the show notes, so make sure you listen.
You can probably tell an increase in audio quality over the years and overall production quality. We've been polishing our processes. But let's go back to 2015, because that's kind of where the Elixir story begins. As I said, we were on WordPress. We were in a lot of pain, actually, because we had a couple of problems. The first problem is that we are on WordPress, custom hosted, self-hosted WordPress, which was set up to do podcasting, but wasn't obviously built for podcasting. WordPress is versatile, so you can build all sorts of things with it. And we were using it for podcasting. And then we were also on 5x5, which would publish our feeds and stuff. And so we actually had to double publish everything at the time. Not WordPress's fault, just kind of the fault of, I guess you call it a business arrangement or a network arrangement. But we had to double publish, which was just painful. And we wanted to stop doing that. We wanted to try out new podcasts, but we were single tenant, meaning we had to spin up a whole new WordPress. The way the whole thing was designed and laid out, it wasn't going to host multiple podcasts for us. It was just the changelog. And that sucked because we had other ideas. We had a bunch of listeners who would want very specific things, like give us more Go, talk more about front end JavaScript. And we didn't want to just shove like a whole bunch of Go episodes into the changelog, because the changelog has always been a very diverse, polyglot, curious podcast that could go anywhere that software goes. And we didn't want to betray that and just start putting like, oh, here's 5 Go episodes in a row. But we did want to try new things. So we wanted to have new podcasts, but we didn't really have a way of getting that done. We had cool ideas that we wanted to do, like for around our transcripts and around like custom integrations and stuff. But I'm not a huge fan of PHP. Everything that you got to do
in your life. Let me tell you something. That is absolutely and utterly amateur. That is what amateurs do. And the reason I can say that's what amateurs do is because that's what everyone does. And everybody amateur.
Who was that?
I don't know. I didn't know if that was on purpose, but I muted it.
George Pickens, is he a part of your guys' meetup group?
Not sure who that was.
That seemed like it was like what do they call those? A Zoom bomb?
I guess so.
Okay.
Yeah, I thought it was part of your presentation. But
I thought it was your PHP.
Right when I said PHP, you went off. Yeah. No, that was a complete surprise. I'm not really sure. I'm recovering. I'm going to take a moment to recover.
Sorry about that.
I've heard of Zoom bombs, but I've never actually seen one. I think of all the potential bombs you could do, that was pretty pedestrian. Could have been much worse.
Yeah, I can't help smiling. I think that was my first as well.
That's getting worse. Well, Kyle,
Oh,
they seem to have our number.
you better take control.
So is this like guacamole where you just keep smacking them down until they stop?
I haven't experienced this before. I just blocked them, so hopefully. I don't know.
You have a Zoom that's just open to whoever wants to join, probably.
Yeah, I mean it's a temporary one, but yeah, the password's included in the URL.
Okay, somebody must.
But it's in a private group, so they have to be in the group. So that's interesting.
Somebody might have leaked the URL or something. I don't know. All right. Well, stay tuned. We might see more randos, but we'll try to continue forward. So I was, at the time, I was a full-time freelance contractor, software developer, and had been for many years. And so any coding that I did on the changelog stuff had to be enjoyable, had to be fun. I was sick of writing WordPress plugins. I was just never going to actually do any of those cool ideas in our current setup. All right, then that episode with Chris McCord happened. Chris is very convincing. He had obviously just came out with Phoenix, and he convinced me to try it out. Now, one thing that we have to be aware of as podcasters is that shiny object syndrome is very much a thing, and we have it worse than most people because like every single week we're being exposed to some cool new technology. And some people are like, how do you keep up with all these technologies? Well, the answer is like we actually like get excited, we talk about it, we look at it, and then like most of the stuff just floats on by. And it's not like we adopt, obviously, all this different things that we talk about. So this is actually a rare occurrence that a person comes on the podcast, tells us about technology, and we adopt that technology. So how did that happen? Well, it happened because I happened to have an actual use case at the time. So most of the time I just don't have an excuse to play with a thing, you know? I'm like, this sounds like a really cool project. I wish I had an excuse to play with it. I had a need at the time, and that need was I wanted to auto-invite new changelog members to our Slack team. So this is back in 2015. We had a memberful setup. We had members and memberful. We had a private Slack back then. Now our Slack is wide open, so anybody can just go get an invite. But back then it was private, and when we would get a new member signed up on memberful, we would manually go and invite them into the Slack pretty much. And I was just sick of doing that. And so I was like, okay, I've been wanting to automate this for a while, and then I'm hearing about Phoenix, and I have this like perfect starter project to give it a shot. And what I really like about this is that it was tight enough scope not to get lost in the magnitude. Sometimes just the difficulty of what you're trying to accomplish means you just aren't going to get over the hump with a new piece of technology, and you're going to give up. It was something that we actually needed, which I thought is nice because if it was a toy, I just don't have time for toys anymore. I wish I did, but I usually don't. And so because we actually needed it, it was a pain point for us. I was actually willing to put the work in to give it a shot. It was useful in very little time. Like I had an immediate win with it. I think I put a few hours in. I didn't know any Elixir. And yet I could, kind of copy paste and kind of line of sight. I'm a web developer for a long time, Ruby on Rails for the most part, done some Node stuff, done a little bit Go. But I was able to actually get that out really fast, which was, I guess, exciting. And it gave me a taste of Elixir without having to know very much. When I actually dove into Elixir more deeply, I had a hard time swimming in certain areas, to be honest. But I actually got this thing out there. It's probably like, 100 lines of code spread across 2 modules. It's a single endpoint, receive an API call from memberful, a webhook basically, and then send an API call to Slack, passing along the email, right? Very simple scope. And I liked what I saw. I liked how quickly I rolled that thing out. So that gave me the confidence to go for it. And so I went and grabbed Programming Phoenix. It definitely was not 1.4 back then. It was earlier than that. And really dove in and tried to figure out this new web framework. And then I just started coding. So, December 22nd, 2015, just get to work basically and start figuring it out. And 10 months later, changelog 2.0. Now, it wasn't 10 months of coding. There was a rebrand going on. There was a switch off of 5x5. So there was like some business partnerships going on. So this wasn't exactly like from December to October 10th of coding, but it was probably about 5 or 6 months of me in my free time coding up this custom CMS. And then we open sourced it. This is 2016, October 10th. A couple of weeks later, we open sourced it. At the time, there were 0 production Elixir Phoenix apps that were open source like this. Now there's a few more, thankfully. I mean, there's probably a lot more, but there's a few more notable ones like Plausible Analytics is a great one. And the way that we built this, it wasn't like, let's build a general purpose podcasting platform and open source it. It was, let's build our own custom podcasting platform and open source it. So the point of open sourcing it was not for people to clone, fork, and launch their own podcast. It was for people to be able to look at what we did and grab ideas and see what a production Phoenix app looks like out there in the wild. So that's 2016 October. Here it is today, still getting worked on, still in production, still doing its thing. 4,300 commits later, and I'm still working on it. This my most recent commit was 4 days ago. Actually, that's just the most recent one I pushed. I have some local stuff I'm working on as well. We're adding chapters right now, which has been a bit of a lift, but is going to be pretty cool when it's all said and done. So that's the history of it, okay? Along the way, things that I found out that I really love about the language. This is an Elixir meetup, so y'all probably going to be nodding your head along with me on this one. Okay, pattern matching, I can't live without it. I go back to Ruby, which is my other favorite language, and I'm like, that's the one thing I super miss. It was also the hardest thing for me to get my head wrapped around at first. But once I did, I was just like, why do I need if statements? I don't even really need if statements very much. I love that. And a lot of the other techniques for like reducing conditionals in your programs seem like misdirection, and like you're not actually reducing them, you're just moving them around. And Elixir, it actually feels like you can just, for the most part, I still throw some ifs in there once in a while, but at least in terms of what data is coming in and stuff like that, you can just pattern match it away. It's pretty awesome. Of course, the pipe operator, big fan of chaining, always has been in Ruby, also in jQuery. Once I saw the pipe operator, it was made a lot of sense immediately and loved it. I love how it's conceptually simple, especially the module system, just the way modules work. It's all very clean. There's just not much to think about. You just alias it or import it if you want to, whatever, however you want to do it, all ties together. Got that immediately. And then I just love functional programming, of course. So all the functional utilities are there, all the goodies that you want to manipulate data. And I find those to be incredibly empowering. Okay, so Phoenix, things I've learned to love about Phoenix. Okay, so pipes are back. Of course, the pipeline concept I think applies perfectly to HTTP requests. You get a request that comes in, it's a bag of data. You have a request coming back, it's a bag of data, your connection, right? You pass it through a pipeline of manipulations. They're going to do what they're going to do. They might modify it, they might not. They're going to pass it along, and at the end of the day, it sends it back. Conceptually, I think that's spectacularly simple and just works really well. Plugging into that, of course, is Plug. Now, this is something I love about Phoenix. Obviously, it's not a Phoenix thing. Plug is a standalone library. Maybe it's even more of an Elixir thing, but Phoenix makes great use of Plug. And I just love writing little plugs for all sorts of little things. I think Plug is a really well-designed API and really takes advantage of the pipeline concept. I love Phoenix's router. It's a lot like Rails's router. I loved Rails's router. And I would say, is it even better? I don't know. It's a little simpler, a little less magic, a little less tomfoolery going on. And so in that way, I do like it. One thing that got me right away, coming from a Rails side, is how small the stack traces are when using Phoenix. I mean, I don't want to state a number, but especially back when I very first started, like that Ola app I wrote, I would throw an error or something in a controller, and I could just like count the function calls in the framework, and there was like 8 of them. I don't know. I'm not sure exactly how many there were back then, but it was like grokkable. Like I could easily follow them. It wasn't like this super long, deep thing that gets all hairy and calls in circles and stuff. Now it's gotten more complicated since those days, but it's still pretty small stack traces. And I think that's pretty cool. Of course, there are things that I've struggled with. Okay, it's not all rainbows and unicorns. Shipping it was tough. This is a whole nother story. I actually brought in help to ship it. That help is a guy who now hosts a show for us called Ship It. And especially back in 2015, there was just not many options, 2016, I should say, for shipping it. And it was a little bit above my pay grade. So that was difficult back then. It's gotten a lot easier since. Lots of people have come along to help ship your Phoenix apps out there into the wild. I have found there to be some lack of library support, or like libraries that are there but actually not all that well maintained. The big one for us is ID3v2. Apparently nobody's doing MP3s with Elixir. We're the first ones. And so I lived without this for a very long time. More recently, we've been working on an ID3v2 parsing and writing library for Elixir with a friend of ours who's been working on it on our behalf. And so that's one of the reasons why we've not shipped chapters all these years into our MP3s, is because we were using FFmpeg to write out all of our tags. And I can get into the details on that if they're interesting to you. Arc is a very popular upload and image library for Elixir-based web apps. It's not simply Phoenix, but it works with Phoenix. And that has been a trouble spot in our dependency tree over the years as it fell into an unmaintained mode and had some bugs. As the community stepped up, there's a takeover project called Waffle, which is a fork and is maintained. And so we've cut over to that and it works pretty well, but had some issues. I don't love IEX and pry, like the way you pry things. There's just little rough edges around it that just don't have the ergonomics that I'm used to coming from Ruby. I think that Ruby's REPL and ability to, I'm not a debugger guy. I'm a printf debugger, but I do like to pry right in there. And you can do it in Elixir, and I do it all the time, but it just doesn't quite work in a smooth sense. So that's been a little bit of a struggle. And then at some point, Phoenix came out with their context concept and really started promoting that. I had already written a lot of my code, so I was kind of like, do I want this in my life? And I think probably for the size and complexity of our application, I just don't see any benefit in the context as a concept. It seems like an unnecessary abstraction layer for us. I think with bigger teams, bigger apps, I could see where it's coming from, but I just don't really get it for us. So I've struggled with that a little bit. I tried to start inserting contexts in and using them throughout, and I just felt like I was rearranging furniture for the most part. So I've actually avoided them. Cool stuff we built thanks to Elixir and Phoenix. Our transcripts for our episodes and our show notes are all synced to GitHub repositories, which allows the community to improve them and work on them with us. These are pretty cool. Transcripts is simpler than show notes because transcripts is a one-way sync into our system. Like we actually only edit the transcripts in Markdown and merge via GitHub, and it's all there. And then our system pulls in the transcript, parses them, displays them on the web page, etc. Show notes is a two-way sync. So you can edit them in our admin. You can also edit them on GitHub, and we keep those synchronized. So it's a little complicated. But it's cool, and it's allowed a lot of other people to easily help out with, errors and omissions and broken links and misspellings, as we're always misspelling things in our transcript. So that's pretty cool. We have this whole vanity domain redirect subsystem. So each podcast has its own short URL, like changelog.fm, gotime.fm, jsparty.fm. And we use those to redirect to all sorts of places around the website. Because when you're on a podcast, it's just so much simpler to say, go to gotime.fm/merch to get the merch. And you don't have to worry about where that is. And we have tons of those. So if you name an episode, it's going to redirect you to the right place. The request form, gosh, you name it. There's a whole bunch of places. And so we have this cool plug-based redirect system that's very simple that we built. We have a persistent on-site player, so it is not a SPA. It's a multi-page app, but we pulled in turbo links that allows us to never refresh the page when you're clicking links around the site. And so we have a persistent player. So if you start a podcast episode, hop over to news, start reading some news, etc. It feels like a SPA, but it's not an SPA. That's more thanks to turbo links than Elixir or Phoenix, but Phoenix made it pretty simple to integrate turbo links and to respond with the right headers and stuff. Again, thanks to Plug. I have a whole blog post on why we chose turbo links. It was controversial, but it's been serving us well for 7 years. We get to do cool stuff like send our guest thank you emails and auto-generate coupon codes for them to get free t-shirts on our merch shop via the Shopify API. These are the kind of things like we wanted to do for years. And just the power of your own custom CMS and the ease of use, really, of HTTP Poison, which I'll talk about some, just makes this kind of stuff dead simple. Live show YouTube integration, that's cool. Not too much to say about it, but we've integrated there. Episode requests, news submissions, basically anything that we dream up, which is spectacular. We can build pretty quickly. That's all I have for slides. I thought I would take a browse through, show you guys some stuff. Any thoughts so far? Any questions?
No, I was just wondering, Jared, could you talk at 1.5 times speed? That's the way I'm used to listening to you. So just a thought.
Well, I could, but I'd probably be 1.5 times stupider as well. So I don't know. I don't know if you actually want that. Let's hop a little bit into the code. People using Phoenix, I know people writing Elixir, there's lots of other things you can do. You're not necessarily doing web apps. Anybody doing web apps?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. So feel free to code review me here. I have no shame. So if I'm doing something dumb, let's talk about it. I'd love to learn. And pull requests are welcome. So I thought I would walk through a little bit. I think dependencies are interesting. I take a lot of time in selecting dependencies, managing those things. What's useful, what's not. We've gotten a lot of mileage out of Oban, so much so that we had, is it Parker Selbert? I think it's Parker, on the show at some point talking about Oban and what he's doing with that, Oban Pro and stuff. So that's for background workers. We shove a lot of stuff into Oban. Running on Postgres, pretty standard there. Scrivener, cool library for pagination stuff. Simple to use. Had to customize it a little bit at some point, I think, simply due to some lack of updates on like which version of your transitive dependencies. We have stayed pretty much up to date. Is this the most recent Phoenix? I think it's close. We could find out real quick. What is it? Mixhex.outdated. Oh. Okay, so we're off by a minor version. But pretty up to date. I don't like to get too far behind, because then that big upgrade really turns into a hell. Like I said, the Arc library is pretty much defunct. Waffle has taken it over. So that's great. Bamboo is what we use for all the mailers. So we just use good old-fashioned SMTP. I think Bamboo does like API style stuff as well, and like SendGrid and stuff. We just use the SMTP adapter, and we send through Campaign Monitor because we've been Campaign Monitor users for a very long time. I do some response caching stuff. So I have this whole response cache, which, you know, you kind of think wouldn't even be necessary with Phoenix, but we have some really expensive calls. Specifically, our master feed, which is every episode ever published of all of our podcasts, takes a couple seconds to render, and most of it's just a crap ton of data. It actually takes a while to send down the wire too. I mean, it's like 2 megs or something like that or more. So we do some response caching for that. We use Concache, which is a wrapper around ETS, and so I've just built some standard response caching, and then like in our controllers we can tell it to just pipe that through the response cache, and so that just stores it in ETS and will respond from there without having to re-render until it expires. Of course, that is all in memory, so it expires every time that we ship a new version or whatever, but we don't really care that much. It's just like a nice thing. It takes those like 600 millisecond responses down to like 2 microseconds. AWS stuff, nothing interesting there. Do you use Uberoth? I'm not sure. This one's been really nice. The GitHub and Twitter integrations have had some issues with different versions of Erlang breaking certain things inside of the GitHub one, but nothing that's been too hard to figure out. Shopify Gem, Sentry, nothing else really all that interesting here, unless somebody wants me to comment on anything in terms of what libraries we're using.
Have you been seduced by Phoenix Live View?
Good question. So I've been seduced, but not satisfyingly so.
Okay, Chris is
It's kind of
working
one of
on you.
those. It's kind of one of those. I definitely have played with it. So
Right.
one thing I thought we could do is we have scratch paper. So let me bring this down. So we have we use HackMD for some stuff. This is like basically Markdown, Google Docs for Markdown, right? And so this we use collaborative scratch paper basically during a show. So like this is JS Party number 237. Everybody can write stuff here, and it's live, it's collaborative. We're in and we're out. Some people use, like, we have different shows, right? So GoTime has its own hosts. JS Party has its own hosts. I'm one of them. Practical AI has its own host, etc. And so some people use Google Docs, some people use this, some people don't use anything. What I wanted was like, okay, and then on our admin side, so like on the admin side, we have this notes field, right, which that'll end up becoming the show notes. And then we have doc URL. Where is it? Yeah, collab doc URL. So like you can link in the collab doc, and that way everybody knows where it is. You can click on it, get to it from there. What I thought was, what would be rad is something akin to this. It could be obviously much more simple, that existed on an episode like the notes field, but it would be separate because this is like synced to GitHub and stuff, which is like a scratch doc. And I tried to use live view to get that going.
Right.
And by try, I mean I spent like an hour and a half. It's not like I spent a week trying this. I'm sure I could have got it. It's a little more complex. Like, we're talking about collaborative document editing. It's just a little bit above the tooling that's provided, by LiveView. So I didn't get there, and I would love to do that. That was my first attempt at LiveView. The other thing, people are like, well, maybe you could just like get rid of the turbo links thing. All right, so like here's our now I'm navigating, right? So this is all turbo links. But maybe you could use live view to accomplish the same thing with like basically like full page non-reloads. And I thought, okay, interesting. That might be the case, but this is one of those ain't broke, don't fix it kind of areas of the website for me. Like, I want to be driving new functionality, not replacing turbo links with live view. But I've certainly thought about it. And if we didn't have HackMD, which, props to them, this is a pretty nice in-browser, markdown editor that's collaborative. If we didn't have this, I probably would have pushed through and built it just for our scratch docs. But because I had it, and because it wasn't like, I got to the point where live view was all hooked up and doing its thing, and I could see like the multiple cursors and stuff, but then it was the actual like data manipulation and synchronization stuff where it's like, oh, maybe I need to go study this, and I'm not going to do that. So I stopped.
What would your solution have been for live view and the policies system that you have? Because your policies rely on plug. How would you have accommodated live view
So
there?
our policies.
And this is awesome, by the way. I love your policies. I stole that.
Oh, you stole it?
So, yeah, so cool.
Awesome. Thank you. Yeah, it's worked really well. I wrote it once and haven't rewritten it. So that's usually a sign that something is working pretty well. So our policies rely, when you say it relies on plug, I'm trying to remember on why exactly it relies on plug. I feel like the controllers use the policies. The policies could stand alone.
Yeah, you see similar patterns.
Because I'm passing the
I think-
connection in sometimes.
Yeah.
No, that's the admin layout.
I can't remember the details, but I think it was the session versus con.
Okay. Yeah, so like
patterns.
the base of the policy system really is
Yeah.
just modules that return true and false.
Right.
And so, you know, these are obviously independent of any sort of web thing. They're just like, pass me an
Mhm.
object and a resource of some kind, and I will tell you if you can do a thing. But I do build up from there using plug inside the controllers to determine what you could do. So yeah, I would have to like shim in, you know, at that layer. And I've never gotten far enough into live view to know like where do you put authorization stuff with live view. I assume it's just like something you call from some sort of function that's returning data or something. But I don't know.
I struggled with it a couple of months ago. I'll send you some bits and pieces that I came up with.
Okay.
But yeah.
Yeah, I guess I never got that far enough to have to solve that particular problem.
Because this is a really elegant solution. I'd love to see a similar solution for live view. That's all.
Oh, wow.
Or one that could do both, which is what
Right.
you're talking about. That'd
Right.
be awesome.
Yeah, so I mean, the base layer of this definitely could do both. It's the second layer where I build it in with plugs into the controllers that you'd have to write
Right.
something else that way.
Yeah.
This is funny. My computer just went into dark mode I just got dark here, I guess, apparently.
Another question is, you're one of the few like Phoenix pure HTML oriented Phoenix apps out there. There's usually a JavaScript front end and a JSON API backend,
Yeah.
and that's the Phoenix or the Elixir bit.
Right.
Why did you do Phoenix HTML?
Why did I do Phoenix HTML? Just because simpler is better for me.
Right.
And I didn't have any reason to build two things when I could build one thing. And so that's just my default. Like I have to have a good reason to build a single page app. And actually, I almost did. In which case I would have built a JSON API, most likely, and consumed it from that app. My only one reason was that persistent on-site player. And then I thought to myself, you know, it's so much simpler if I can just render HTML, you know, like the good old days. A lot of things become simpler and easier. I don't have two code bases. I don't have this bifurcated technology, blah, blah, blah. I have very little JavaScript. I did not want it's a content site. It's not an interactive web app, right? So I wanted to be content first. And so for me, rendered HTML is just de facto content first. And I knew that Phoenix was super fast, so I didn't have the issues I used to have with, you know, server-side rendered Rails apps where I'd like immediately be putting in Redis and stuff and memcached and stuff to fight off those slow responses. So I was like excited because I was like, the response times are super fast. I just talked about a couple of our slow responses, but like everything else is blazing fast. Right. And so I just wanted to just keep it simple, monolith, you know, it's one person working on it.
Yeah.
And the only reason why I did consider, I almost built 2015, it probably would have been like an Angular app at that time.
Angular or Ember, maybe.
Yeah, Ember probably, or something like that.
Yeah.
I had used React a little bit at that time. I think React was out. I don't know. But the reason why I almost did was because of the persistent player. And then when I realized how easy it was to plug turbo links in, and like honestly, the first time I tried it, it just worked. And I was like, oh, why would I rewrite everything for this? So that was just the decision I made then. I have thought recently, you know, gosh, you could almost static site a lot of this thing, you know, pre-render a whole bunch of it, and then have the admin be Elixir, like, because I kind of have two apps in here, right? I got the admin side and the public side, and they're very different. Obviously, they're manipulating the same data. One's more write heavy and one's more read heavy, but I have considered like, okay, if I was going to start fresh today, because the code, the JavaScript code, like, I hope you didn't look at that. Like, it's not cool, you know, like it's not good. It's like old school event listener. Like it looks like jQuery stuff.
Right.
Like this, you know, attach stuff when things happen, right? Every
Yeah.
time, you know, it's all handlers and stuff. And so when we do a redesign, which we're working on a rebrand, you know, who knows when it's going to happen. But like when we decide to redo the website, I'm going to rewrite the JavaScript into something that's more sveltey, most likely ish. And at that time I thought, well, what if I just separate off the back end, leave it Elixir Phoenix rendered HTML, admin, rewrite the front end in something that precompiles based on the data that's available, and maybe build an API that it consumes, because then I could have a public API that people could use. So I've considered it, but most of the time I'm just go back to like, it's not broke right now. That's a lot of work, and it works very well for our use case. So be pragmatic and leave it as
Yeah.
is.
Yeah, I mean, I think you'd have the modern thing would be to have Phoenix Live View on the admin side, and then Phoenix HTML with no authentication at all on the front, so it just almost renders to static.
Yeah.
But anyway,
we do have customization. I mean, it's minimal. That's where I've always gotten stuck. And like, I like this
Right.
new islands architecture that people are working on. Like in the case of Astro is doing it, and Dino now with their fresh framework are talking about these islands architectures where you basically have like small islands on the page which are dynamic but can also be personalized that way. And so we have like aspects of the website that if you're logged in, they are dynamic, but it's not very much. And I don't know. I guess I always hold out like, well, what if we want more stuff that's personalized and customized to the currently logged in user? I would be mad at myself if it was all, you know, pre-rendered and static, and all of a sudden I wanted to customize something. But there are workarounds for those things, but it gets complicated. So kind of just left it as it is. That's a great question though. I've definitely gone back and forth on it.
Yeah.
And I still do. But remember when I did, a lot of the reasons I made these decisions is like these things didn't exist. There was no live view. So when I first made the decision, it was much easier. Now there's more choices, which you get the paradox of choice. And you're like, well, there's more choices, but which one's the right choice, you know?
Yeah.
Good question. So yeah, I am going to rewrite all this. This seems like a lot when I'm looking at it, but there's really not that much here. We're talking like, you know, this is like the boot, and it's like a few hundred lines.
Lightweight frameworks like Alpine are almost like TurboLinks, what you did with TurboLinks.
Yeah.
Just sprinkling the JavaScript through the page.
Yeah, I've always been more of a sprinkles guy, honestly. I built SPAs before. I built a huge SPA for GrooveShark back in the day. It was just massive, and it was back before there was much tooling. I actually used the JavaScript MVC, which is like a dinosaur at this point. I don't know if it exists anymore, but I've always preferred to decorate myself. But I don't usually build Gmail or Slack. You know, I'm building mostly
You're publishing.
Content. Yeah, content-driven publishing sites. Some interaction, some live stuff, some dynamic stuff, but not Trello. If I was building Trello, I certainly wouldn't go for.
And you're self-funded small business as well, so your hosting and your bandwidth has to be inexpensive.
Yeah.
Can you talk about Fly.io and your experiences with that?
Yeah.
Let's hear about that.
For sure. So we've been with Fly for since February or March. So it hasn't been long enough to comment too much. For me, it's like a return home. So I talked about that a whole other story with Ship It. We've been on lots of different infrastructure. Gerhard has kind of taken us on a tour, and we were running Kubernetes up until then, which was way above my pay grade. And I always had to call Gerhard in to do stuff. We started off, it was like Ansible scripts and Docker, and then actually Concourse CI. I don't know, there's been a lot of things over the years. And we were on Kubernetes running on Linode up until earlier this year when we went to Fly. And for me, I'm like an old school sysadmin guy, but then once Heroku came out, I just threw away all the sysadmin stuff. I'm like, I do not want to administer a system ever again. And all my customers put them on Heroku, you know, like, you're going to use Heroku if you're my customer, is basically what I told my customers. and it was great. And they didn't really have the Elixir tooling back when we were getting going. It wasn't much of an option. We already had a relationship with Linode, so it made sense to like want to run on a VPS. And so we went down that path. So fly.io, even though I've only been on there a few months, it's like a return to home for me. Like I'm back on a pass, you know, like I like it. It's very much like their Heroku experience. They have their own kind of ideas and primitives. We're not doing much with it yet. We're just getting to where we're going to start clustering and stuff. We have some issues with like the ETS caches and things where like once you deploy multiple nodes, your ETS tables aren't, you know, crossing all those nodes, and so you'll have caches here that aren't there.
Right.
And so we had some issues with like, oh, this feed shows a new episode, but this feed doesn't because it's in Tokyo.
Right.
So like those kind of things we have to iron out, and we plan on it because we want to run instances all around the world and test
some sort of message bus or something. Is that what you'll do, or is there an API for? Is there a Fly.io API for cache clears? Or?
I think there's a way of making those clusters all have shared memory or something, shared ETS tables. Maybe y'all know better than I do, but I think there's a way of making those tables shared across nodes, even at the Erlang level or the Beam level, excuse me.
You certainly, yeah, I don't know much about Fly.io, but you certainly can in Elixir and Erlang.
Yeah, and so I think that's like, I think that's the move, honestly. It's just like you don't need to do a Fly.io specific thing. You just have to like set up your deal to work better and then somehow tell Fly, like, I mean, they know where all your different nodes exist. I don't know. I haven't tried it yet, obviously. I'm just talking out my butt, but I think it's pretty straightforward and we're excited to do it, but we haven't really done it yet. So we're running pretty stock, like one node, one app node, one database node. I would love for their database, their hosted database, to be more like a hosted database platform, like what I had at Heroku with their Postgres, you know, provider or whatever it's called. Flies is very much like, here's another app container that has Postgres installed, and it has like special commands you can do with it, and we back it up once an hour. But like the visibility and all that, there's just like it's not fleshed out yet, but they're pretty young. Yeah. But exciting.
That's one thing I was wondering about. How do you persist your ops when you're dealing with Fly? Do you have bash scripts or run books, or
yes?
How do you not get lost in the command line? You know, what did I do last sort of situation?
So Gerhard's move has always been make files, which is basically like scripts.
Okay.
Yeah, that's what he's always done. Make files, and like the actual deployment pipeline I can't speak to very well, but I know there's like daggers doing things, and you know there's integrations there that I don't really know about. But yeah, make files mostly, you know, some scripts to deploy stuff and back things up and reload and etc. But it's all pretty, you know, if anything you've done on Heroku, like conceptually, all translates over. Awesome. Cool. Any other thoughts? I guess we're getting, it's 9 o'clock already.
Hi, I was going to ask a question, actually.
Sure, go ahead, Alex.
Yes, yeah, I'm Alex. Hi. I was wondering, like, if you got any good use out of OTP, if you had any interesting cases that were able to use it for. So now that's the one difference, obviously, compared to, you know, Rails. You can do a lot of different concurrency in line. You might not need, like, you know, Oban for cases.
So we lived years without Oban. I'm not well versed in OTP personally, haven't had to. I think that speaks well to the abstraction layers that Phoenix provides. But I went years and years and years with no background persistence and just simply, you know, starting new threads and just saying, or new processes, and just async await stuff. Task.go. I can't remember what's it called? Task.await. Task.start link. Still using stuff like that just to send notifications and stuff. For a long time, we didn't have Oban. We brought it in. We do have a news queue module, which is database backed, and basically just is it's a first in, first out publisher that runs on a timer, but also has scheduling. So you can say, put this at the top, you know, put this at the end, You can also say publish this at a specific time. So I can say this goes out at 10:45 or whatever. And this module handles all that. So this is Postgres backed. And I used to run this with a gem called Quantum. You guys know that one? A gem, listen to me, package, which is basically like a cron-like deal. And this would wake up and it would run that. You put it in your supervisor tree. And I liked it because I could actually specify with my old school sysadmin skills when to run things. And so I was using this plus that queue, that background queue, which is like just a database table for publishing at specific times and repeatedly. That got replaced with Oban. So Oban takes care of that. So this is gone now. And then the reason why I brought Oban in was we had a very specific need that's slipping my mind right now, but it has to do with when we go about sending notifications. Here it's coming back. So we added the ability to edit your comment. Let's take that, Twitter. We had the ability to edit your comment, but it was like for typos and stuff. So there's a timer on it. Like, yeah, you got 5 minutes because you always notice it, right, when you hit submit, right? Even though there's a preview. And so we said, well, you can edit your comment for 5 minutes. But we would send comment notifications out. So like if you're subscribed to a thread and somebody comments on it, you're going to get that notification email. And so we needed to delay those comment notifications for 5 minutes and then send them. And we couldn't get that done with just cron, with Quantum. And so that's when we introduced Oban, because it has that feature. And Alex Koutmos helped us out with that. He actually coded that up for us from Promex. And he brought Oban in. Once we had Oban, we're like, okay, let's just go ahead and use it for all these other things too, because like it has nice features and it has some, it has that persistence stuff. So to answer, that's the long answer. To answer it again shortly, I haven't really used OTP for much. I did not have a background processing library for like the first 5 years. It's like the last 2 years we've had it, and it's kind of one of those deals where we brought it in for a specific feature, and then once it was there, we just decided to put everything into it. So our news publisher runs through it now, but even that just like does its thing. Alex set this up. I'm not sure how it actually schedules the once per minute part, because it just runs at once a minute. Looks like it's part of this scheduled queue. I don't know. I think Oban has some sort of a cron feature. Does anybody know? I bet it's in like some sort of config.
Yeah, it looks like it does have periodic cron jobs.
Yeah, I mean, I know it does. Oh, look at that. Here it is. So cool. So Oban has this, which pretty much was doing exactly what Quantum was doing. So we do a Slack importer. That's just to like find out who's in Slack. That runs once a day. Our stats processing is all internal. So we go out to Fastly. Well, Fastly writes its logs into S3. We go out to S3, pull down the logs, parse them, figure out who's been downloading what. That runs nightly. Notion as well. We just have some reporting through Notion that we send back to our customers, and we update that with like listen counts and stuff. And then here's the news publisher, which runs once a minute. And so that's basically fronting that queue that cron used to be fronting. So prior to this, we didn't have any background job system. And I love that. It was one less thing. Like, I don't need Redis, I don't need anything else. And so I resisted it for a long time. And finally, Alex Koutmos was like, yeah, you need this because you need to be able to delay a notification for 5 minutes. And he's like, and Oban's really cool, so why don't you try it? And I'm like, all right, go ahead. But gosh, I don't actually know very much about OTP. In fact, I think I was on a podcast one time. I was on Full Stack Radio with Adam Wathen, and I was talking about Elixir because he invited me on to talk about it. And he's like, tell me about OTP. And I almost crapped myself. I couldn't even like explain what it was. I was like, it's like this library thing that's like a part of the runtime, and you send stuff to it. And it does, So that's me flaunting my ignorance, but I think it's pretty cool that you have all this power, and I've seen people do very cool things with it. But like us boring old app dev guys can just like use things and not have to worry about what's under the hood as much. Because so often those abstraction layers leak, and like you have to know the internals of OTP to run this thing, but not in this setup. You just don't have to. And I think that's pretty cool.
You mentioned the caching earlier, so like even OTP is really just a collection of libraries and gen server and all that really, but also ETS is part of OTP, so that caching layer is part of it.
Well, there you go. I've been using it this whole time. Yeah, ETS is cool stuff. I mean, I really liked building my own little lightweight caching stuff just with like the tools available and not having to pull in. I showed you the dependency tree. There's stuff in there, but it's not like crazy town by any means. And this is like darn near legacy app at this point. It's been running in production for 7 years. It's been worked on quite a bit and has served a lot of different needs. And there's just not much cruft, which I appreciate.
Have you done a show on Redwood JS?
We have. Oh gosh, man, we've done shows on everything.
I know, but Redwood JS is like, has got amazing provenance in terms of the founders and whatnot.
Yes.
Do you think there's a possibility for something like that in the Elixir Phoenix LiveView sort of ecosystem?
There's certainly place for it. I don't know if there's an appetite for it.
Right.
I'm not sure if there's an appetite for Redwood JS, even though I agree with you 100%. Gosh, it's competitive right now.
Yeah. Oh, right now.
It is.
Yeah.
I mean, every time we turn around, there's a new framework and they're good. Like, it's not just like, hey guys, check out my new front end framework. Like serious players doing very serious moves. Dino's Fresh looks very good. I mean, Redwood has a lot of great ideas. Redwood attaches itself hard to GraphQL. I'm not sure that's the best move long term, but it's putting its stake in the ground, and so that shies me away from it. I don't know. They don't seem to have much traction yet, but they're trying to like carve out the startup niche. There's definitely a space for it, but in terms of like, it could be a great offering, a live view based competitor to these things.
There's a Laravel like CMS-y thing out there.
What's that? There is one in Laravel?
Yeah, it's called Livewire.
Oh yeah. That's the same is that the same guy that does Alpine or no?
I think there's crossover, yeah.
Okay, maybe they're using some stuff.
Yeah.
Caleb Horzio. Yeah, I'm not sure.
I think Chris McCord consulted on that project as well, but on the WebSocket side.
Yeah, I don't know. It's an interesting thought. I think there's definitely an opportunity there. I'm not sure how easy it is to actually lay hold on it, but yeah, I think there's space.
We are 12 minutes over. If anybody has any last minute questions, otherwise maybe we can wrap up. We're not keeping everybody all night.
Right on.
Thanks so much.
I guess we could have just started with the conversation and skipped the whole presentation part.
No, I really like your tour. Thanks for doing it.
Oh,
yeah, thanks, Jared, for coming and giving us a talk, and congrats on the 500th episode.
Thanks, man.
Yeah, thank you.
Nice meeting y'all. All right, have a great night, everybody.
Thanks so much.
Goodbye.
Okay, bye.
Bye.